The courtroom was quiet when the bailiff called the name. Leonard Briggs. A few heads turned curious but unsure. Then from the back row, a tall black man in a rumpled gray suit stood up. No lawyer, no briefcase, no entourage, just him. He walked slowly, purposefully down the center aisle, shoulders straight, expression calm, not defiant, not proud, just steady like he'd been through rooms like this before. Two officers sitting in the back leaned toward each other. "That's gotta be him," one muttered. "Probably one of those guys who thinks the law doesn't apply to him." The other chuckled. They laughed not quietly. A few people glanced their way. Leonard didn't. The judge, an older white man with tired eyes and a thinning comb-over, adjusted his glasses and looked over the file. His voice carried across the room like a local radio host who'd seen too many Tuesdays. "Mr. Briggs, you're being charged with failure to comply during a lawful stop." "Is that right?" Leonard nodded once. "That's what the report says. And no legal representation today. I don't need one." Another snicker from the back. The judge paused, glanced their way, but said nothing. The room settled into that uneasy hush where everything feels a bit too still, like holding breath. While the judge continued, "This seems like a minor violation." "We'll keep it brief. Mr. Briggs, anything you'd like to say before we proceed?" Leonard stepped forward. Slowly, he reached inside his coat. One of the officers half rose from his seat, hand inching toward his holster. Leonard paused, not afraid, not rattled, just waiting for the moment to settle. Then he pulled out a thin laminated badge and set it gently on the edge of the judge's bench. "My name is Leonard D. Briggs," he said quietly. "I'm Director of Internal Affairs, Federal Bureau of Investigation." The room went silent, truly silent. The kind of silence that makes time feel slower. The kind that spreads. The judge stared at the badge, his mouth slightly open. The officer who had stood froze, then slowly sat back down. His partner's face had gone pale. "You're with the FBI?" the judge asked, his voice suddenly less sure. Leonard didn't blink. "Internal Affairs. I oversee misconduct investigations for departments across the southeastern region, including the ones that keep turning off their body cams during traffic stops." "You could have heard a pin drop. I prefer everything stay on the record." Leonard added, his voice still calm. "Full transparency." No one was laughing now, and what began as a routine court appearance was about to turn an entire department in a town inside out. It was just after 10:30 p.m. when Leonard Briggs eased his rental car off Highway 45 near Biloxi, Mississippi. He'd been on the road since morning, visiting small-town police departments flagged for suspicious reports, missing body cam footage, inconsistent use of force logs, and too many complaints that vanished without review. The silver Toyota Camry he drove was plain on purpose. No flash, no attention. He liked it that way. Leonard wasn't the kind of man who announced himself. Observation came first, quiet, unassuming. That night he was headed toward a modest motel on Bayou View Drive when the red and blue lights flared behind him. He exhaled, pulled to the shoulder, and turned off the engine. No frustration, no fear. Just a quiet breath like a man who had rehearsed this before. In the mirror, he saw two white officers step out of their cruiser, both mid-30s, one bald with a flashlight already in hand. They didn't take their time. The bald one rapped hard on the driver's window without so much as a greeting. "License and registration," he barked. Leonard rolled the window halfway. "May I ask the reason for the stop, officer?" The man's tone sharpened. "Didn't use your blinker when you changed lanes back there." "License. Registration. Now." From the passenger side, the second officer appeared. "You got something to hide?" he asked, voice edged with suspicion. Leonard kept his tone level. "No, but I'd like to understand if this is a traffic stop or an interrogation." That was the wrong thing to say. The bald officer leaned in. "You giving me attitude, step out of the vehicle." "I haven't refused anything," Leonard replied. "I asked a question. I said, get out." Leonard didn't move. Instead, he handed over his license. A standard Alabama ID, clean. No mention of the FBI. Just Leonard Briggs from Montgomery, a man who'd followed the rules. Still, that wasn't enough. "Where you headed?" the second officer asked. Leonard looked him in the eye. "Can't say. You can't or you won't, federal protocol." That phrase changed everything. Something in the bald officer's expression tightened. "You think you're above the law," he snapped. Leonard didn't answer. The second officer opened the passenger door. "Out of the car, now." "This stop is no longer lawful," Leonard said quietly. They didn't care. Both officers yanked him out of the car, forced him to the ground, knees in his back. One cursed under his breath while the other radioed it in as refusal to comply. Leonard didn't resist. He didn't yell. His face pressed to the gravel. He stared forward, taking in every detail, every word. He'd flicked on a small audio recorder in his coat pocket the moment the lights came on. Habit. Survival. Not because he expected trouble, but because he knew it didn't matter what you wore. What mattered was how people saw you. And in that moment, they saw a black man alone on a dark highway. By the time they dragged him into the station, a report had already been started, rushed and one-sided. It claimed Leonard had been verbally aggressive and refused to state his destination. No mention of their tone, no mention of force, and of course, no body cam footage. Leonard asked for their badge numbers. One officer smirked. "Don't worry, you'll get your questions answered in court." They placed him in a holding cell. No call, no explanation, no supervisor. Just fluorescent lights buzzing overhead and the quiet satisfaction of men who thought they had the upper hand. But they didn't, because what they didn't know was that the man they'd cuffed and shoved into that holding room was the very person tasked with uncovering the very kind of behavior they had just displayed. And the courtroom they dragged him into the next morning wasn't just a place for charges to be read. It was the beginning of their reckoning. Leonard knew how these things worked. He'd reviewed hundreds of misconduct files. He knew what bad stops looked like, how force could be justified in paperwork even when it wasn't in practice. He also knew the statistics, how stops like his happened more often to men who looked like him, especially in towns like this. But this wasn't about him needing to prove anything. This was about exposing a pattern. Back in the courtroom, when he'd placed his badge on the bench, he hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't demanded anything. He simply told the truth. Now the people who had once smirked at his silence were swallowing the weight of their own decisions. And outside, the morning sun was rising over Biloxi, sticky and slow, like it didn't yet know the storm that had just been set in motion. Leonard didn't linger in the courtroom once the hearing ended. He walked out the way he'd walked in, alone, deliberate and sure of the steps he needed to take. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about accountability. And for the department that had treated him like he didn't matter, that word was about to take on a very real, very human meaning. The silence in the courtroom didn't fade. It deepened. After Leonard Briggs set his FBI credentials on the judge's bench, not a soul moved. The badge gleamed faintly under the overhead lights, small, official, and unmistakable. Gone were the sneers from the two officers in the back. The one with the shaved head sat frozen, blinking hard like he'd just seen a ghost. The judge, still seated behind the high bench, looked suddenly very small. "You're saying you work for the FBI?" he asked, his voice quieter now, with less certainty. Leonard didn't blink. "Not saying I do." He motioned toward the badge. "You can verify the number with Director Travis McCall's office, or the Office of Inspector General in D.C. At the clerk's table, a woman with salt and pepper hair, Darlene with 3 decades of courtroom instincts, stood up slowly. "Your Honor, shall I make that call?" she asked. The judge nodded a bit too quickly. Leonard stepped back, allowing her space, his hands now folded quietly in front of him. The entire courtroom seemed to lean forward, barely breathing. Even the toddler in the gallery who had been fussing earlier sat perfectly still in his mother's lap. One of the officers whispered to the other, his voice low but anxious. "There's no way this guy's real." "I'm telling you," the other muttered, "that badge looked real. So did the ID. If this is legit, we're screwed." Leonard heard every word, but he didn't turn to look. His eyes were fixed on the judge, who now avoided his gaze. 5 long minutes passed. Then the clerk returned, holding a small notepad. "Confirm," she said. "Leonard Briggs, FBI, Internal Affairs, Southeastern Division, 27 years of service." She didn't look at the officers. She didn't have to. A heavy pause settled over the room. This time it wasn't awkward silence, it was shame, the kind that makes the air thick. The judge shifted in his seat. The prosecutor opened his mouth and shut it again. Leonard finally spoke. "I didn't come here to cause a scene," he said, his voice measured and quiet. "I didn't even come here to file a complaint. I was traveling under assignment off the record, visiting departments under active federal review." He glanced around the room. "I didn't offer my credentials. I wasn't obligated to. I gave my license, remained calm, followed the law, and I was assaulted, thrown to the ground, detained for hours. My rights were ignored, but I documented everything, every word, and I know exactly what procedures were violated." The judge leaned back, folding his hands tightly together. "Mr. Briggs, he started. "I'm not here for your apology," Leonard said firmly but without malice. "I'm here to request that the charges against me be dismissed immediately, and that the 2 officers involved be placed on administrative leave effective today, pending federal review." The judge hesitated just for a second, then raised a hand to silence the prosecutor who had started to speak. "Granted," he said. The bald officer stood suddenly. "You're suspending us just like that." His voice cracked. Leonard turned to face him. "This isn't about me," he said. "It's about every person you've treated like they didn't matter. Every citizen who didn't have a badge to pull out." He took a small step closer. "I do, and I still ended up face down in the dirt." The second officer tried to explain. "We didn't know who you were, all right. If we had known," Leonard raised a hand. "That's the problem." The courtroom emptied in a hurry. People filed out quickly like they just witnessed something they weren't supposed to see. The 2 officers stood near the exit, pale and wordless, stunned by how fast everything had changed. Outside, the Mississippi morning hung thick with humidity. Leonard didn't linger. He walked to his car, settled behind the wheel, and finally exhaled. There was no triumph in his breath, no relief, just the quiet weight of a man who'd seen this play out too many times and knew it never really ended in a courtroom. Down the road, Sheriff Ricky Halburn sat in his office when the call came through. He pinched the phone between his cheek and shoulder, half listening. "FBI," he repeated. "You're telling me 2 of my guys arrested a federal investigator, dragged him into court?" "Yes, sir," came the reply. "Leonard Briggs, Internal Affairs." Ricky slammed the phone down and looked across the room at his deputy, Tamara Wells. She stood near the door, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "You read the report?" he asked. "I did," she said. Something about it never sat right. Back at the courthouse behind closed doors, the judge huddled with his clerk and a few local officials. No transcripts were kept. No minutes recorded. Just hushed voices, red faces, and a growing concern about what might hit the press. Meanwhile, Leonard sat alone at the motel laptop, open secure line buzzing. When the call connected, the voice on the other end was calm, firm. "You all right?" the man asked. "I'm fine," Leonard said. "But they're not." "What's the situation?" Leonard laid it out, every detail. The traffic stop, the aggression, the missing footage, the overnight detainment. "This the first complaint from that department?" the caller asked. "No," Leonard replied. "We've had 3 others in the last year and a half, all dropped. One guy moved out of state." There was a long pause. "Then let's make it official," the man said. "Start the inspection." Leonard nodded slowly, though no one could see him. "You want me to keep it quiet?" "Not anymore." He closed the laptop and leaned back. The room was still. His mind wasn't. This wasn't just about 2 bad cops. It never was. It was about a pattern, a system, a culture that thrived when no one was watching. And Leonard Briggs had just made it clear someone was watching now. Leonard Briggs didn't waste time. That very night, while the courtroom whispers still hung in the air, he was already at work in his motel room. His suit jacket lay draped over a chair. His shirt sleeves were rolled up. The laptop screen bathed the small room in a dim, steady glow. This was his rhythm. Quiet hours, focused hands, no distractions. He wasn't thinking about what had just happened in court. He was thinking about what always happened after. He knew the drill first, the excuses, then the silence, then the missing files. So Leonard started digging. The first step was to file a formal request for the body cam footage from his stop. He logged into the department's public portal and submitted the paperwork timestamped specific professional. Then he leaned back and waited. He didn't wait long. Within an hour, the reply came in cold and clipped. We regret to inform you that the body cam footage from the incident on May 14th is unavailable due to a technical malfunction. We are currently reviewing maintenance logs to determine the source of the failure. Leonard exhaled softly through his nose. Not a sigh, just recognition. He'd seen it before. Too many times. So he made another call, this time to a contact at the DOJ's Regional Evidence Division. Can you cross-check their body cam system, he asked. 10 minutes later, the analyst had an answer. They've had 6 recorded malfunctions in the last 10 months. Every single one during stops involving Black or Latino drivers. None during training or standard traffic calls. Leonard just nodded, jotting it down. At the department, tension was building. Word had gotten around. Officers who had once joked freely now walked more carefully. Eyes lowered, voices hushed. Officer Curtis Dell, the bald one who'd pulled Leonard from the car, sat at his desk, staring at the screen like it might fix itself. Across from him, Deputy Tamara Wells scrolled through archived files, her face tight with focus. She opened one from last December. A young Black man stopped 3 blocks from home, claimed he had been shoved against his car, filed a complaint, body cam malfunction, no follow-up. Then another and another. Same story, same outcome. Tamara muttered under her breath. They really thought no one would look. In the back office, Brian, the department's IT technician, sat hunched over his workstation. He was quiet, good with machines, and usually kept out of the mess. But that morning, he received a private message through the internal chat system. Hey, check the camera logs from May 14th. See who accessed the files before they disappeared. Brian hesitated. He wasn't the confrontational type, but curiosity pushed past his unease. He tapped in a few commands and ran a trace. The answer appeared almost instantly. Dell accessed the system twice. Once 2 hours after the arrest, again the next morning. Both times bypassed review flags. Both times deleted log entries. Brian stared at the screen. Then he printed the report, slipped it into an envelope, and walked it down the hall. He didn't email it. He handed it straight to Tamara. She opened it, jaw set, eyes narrowing. Thank you, she said softly. Brian gave a small nod and walked away without a word. The next morning, Leonard stepped through the department's front doors wearing the same wrinkled gray suit. He carried a small manila folder under one arm. The desk officer nearly jumped to his feet. Agent Briggs, we weren't expecting you. I'm not here to cause trouble, Leonard said. I'm here to confirm patterns. He didn't wait for permission. He walked straight back toward the operations wing. People moved out of his way quietly. At the sheriff's office door, he knocked once and stepped in. Sheriff Ricky Halburn looked up, eyes red, face worn. I assume you got our email, he said. I did, Leonard replied, setting the folder on the desk. I also got the access logs. Ricky didn't reach for it. Someone went into your system, Leonard continued, and manually deleted the body cam footage. After the arrest. Before the arraignment. Ricky rubbed his temples. We're looking into it. No, Leonard said, quietly but firmly. You're not. I am. He turned to leave, then paused in the doorway. I suggest you have Officer Dell's badge and weapon ready by the end of the day. Internal Affairs will be on site this week. Ricky didn't argue, and Leonard didn't look back. By Wednesday morning, 2 unmarked black SUVs rolled into the rear parking lot of the Jefferson County Police Department. No lights, no sirens, just presence. Leonard stepped out first. With him were two agents from Washington, Grace Mendoza, a compliance strategist with eyes like flint, and Nathan Cole, a digital forensics expert who barely spoke but missed nothing. They weren't there for show. They were there to pull everything into the light. Inside, the mood had shifted. The usual swagger was gone. Officers kept to their desks, speaking in low tones, unsure of what would come next. Grace headed straight for the records room. She requested disciplinary files, training documents, evaluation reports, anything with a signature or a date. Nathan met up with Brian. He was given full access to the server. No pushback, no excuses. Brian just handed it over and quietly walked away. Leonard sat in a small office with Tamara. Her laptop was open, windows stacked with years of incident reports. She didn't look up. These all follow the same pattern, she said. Pulled over, aggression, cameras off, vague write-ups. No interviews, no follow-through. Leonard nodded. It's not just about a bad stop. It's about what gets ignored, what gets hidden, what everyone learns to accept as normal. Tamara turned her screen. May of last year, man stopped after work. No arrest, no ticket. Report says he was non-compliant, but no details. Same language. Every time, Leonard said. Down the hall, Grace walked into Ricky's office without knocking. I need your department's training documentation, she said. Use of force protocol, body cam policy, everything. Ricky pointed to a cabinet. Take what you need. She opened a drawer, scanned the materials, and frowned. This stuff is 4 years out of date. He said nothing. Meanwhile, Nathan was deep in the server. He pulled deleted logs, flagged old entries, and reconstructed incomplete video files. He found 2 recordings labeled corrupted. One had audio. He played it, adjusted the levels, and handed Leonard a pair of headphones. Leonard listened. Where you headed? Can it say, you can't or you won't? Federal protocol. You think you're above the law. Then came the sound of a door, feet moving fast, gravel scraping, a grunt. Leonard took the headphones off and stood. He walked straight to Ricky's office. We're issuing a compliance hold, he said. No officer from this department is to participate in field operations until the federal review is complete. Ricky leaned forward, exhausted. You're shutting us down. Temporarily, Leonard replied. Dispatch only, emergencies only. As of today, your department is under federal supervision. Ricky exhaled through his nose. You know what this will do to us? Leonard didn't flinch. You know what not doing it already did. He left the office without another word. Downstairs, Tamara was waiting. I pulled the complaint log, she said. There's a pattern in the denials. Most were dismissed without even a phone call. And the names signing off on every one of them? She handed Leonard the paper. Curtis Dell. Again and again, Leonard folded the page, slipped it into his coat pocket. Good work, he said quietly. Tamara looked at him, unsure. You think any of this will change things? Leonard paused at the door. That depends, he said softly. Do you? By Friday morning, the story wasn't just circulating inside Jefferson County Police. It was spreading across town like a quiet storm. It started with a brief report on the local news FBI official detained in wrongful traffic stop. No names, no details, but it didn't need them. People in Biloxi had already heard whispers. Some had seen the courtroom. Others had caught the expressions on the officers' faces when the badge hit the bench. Then came the audio clip, grainy, pulled from a recovered patrol car mic, but crystal clear in the ways that mattered. Where you headed? Can't say. You can't or you won't, federal protocol. You think you're above the law. That line, federal protocol, hit harder than expected. It echoed across breakfast counters, barbershops, gas stations. Folks didn't just hear it, they felt it. At Oakland Cafe, a group of older men hunched over their coffee mugs, voices low and serious. I'm telling you, one said they stopped that man because they thought he was just some nobody. Figured they could rough him up like always. Well, if he didn't show ID, he did. License was clean. And even if he hadn't, that's not how you treat a person. Doesn't matter who he is. Across town in a modest community center on Jefferson Avenue, a group of parents gathered after school. Not official, not organized. Just tired. Tired of explaining to their kids how to stay safe, what tone to use if they ever got pulled over. Tired of telling them to keep their hands in sight to say yes, sir, even when it felt like the opposite of dignity. By late afternoon, the mayor called for a town hall. No fancy invitations, just word of mouth and one sign taped to the courthouse doors, community meeting tonight. All welcome. The room filled faster than anyone expected. Some folks came angry, some came worried, some just came to listen. Mayor Harold Lanning, a man in his early 70s with a stiff back and tired eyes, stepped behind the podium. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted the mic. "We're aware of the investigation," he said, voice wavering. "We're cooperating fully with federal authorities, and we intend to make changes." A woman stood up near the back. Her name was Felicia Green. 2 years earlier, her teenage son had filed a complaint that vanished into thin air. "You gonna reopen those old cases?" she asked. "We're looking into that," Lanning replied. Felicia didn't flinch. "Don't look, act." A few scattered claps broke out. They weren't loud, but they were real. Leonard stood near the back wall, arms crossed, eyes focused. He hadn't come to speak. He came to listen. Tamara Wells slipped in beside him halfway through. "Didn't think this many people would show," she whispered. Leonard nodded. "They always do. Once they stop being afraid of the silence." One by one, voices filled the room. A high school quarterback spoke about being stopped walking home in his Letterman jacket, no explanation, no apology. A single mother described being pulled over twice in a week, asked if her car was stolen. An elderly man, quiet for most of the evening, told a story from 1989 how he'd been cuffed, questioned, and released without reason. Until tonight, he'd never told a soul. None of these stories had ever made the news. But tonight, the room listened. Then Sheriff Ricky Halburn stepped up to the mic. The noise dropped to a hush. He didn't look like himself. Maybe older, maybe just more human. "I've been in this job 31 years, he began. "And I'd be lying if I said I haven't failed some of you." He paused, glanced over at Leonard. "We didn't know who Mr. Briggs was. But that's not the problem. The problem is we didn't care who any of you were." Silence fell again. Not shocked silence, just stillness. "We're going to reopen every dismissed complaint," Ricky continued. "We'll work with federal oversight, and anyone who helped bury those reports, myself included, will be held accountable." Someone near the front shouted, "Talk is cheap." Ricky nodded. "Then hold me to it." A beat passed. Then another. No applause. Just a heavy recognition that something had cracked open and nobody could pretend anymore. Tamara leaned over to Leonard. "You believe him?" Leonard didn't look away from the stage. "I believe the room." Outside, people gathered in quiet clusters under the street lamps, the warm air buzzing with conversation. They didn't talk about policy. They talked about their sons, their neighbors, the names that never made it past a police report. And though it wasn't over, not even close, something had shifted. Because when a town starts listening to its own people, the excuses begin to lose their power. But Leonard knew change doesn't stop with speeches. It lives or dies by what comes next. And he had one more meeting ahead, the one that would test whether any of this would stick. That Monday morning, Leonard climbed the front steps of City Hall. He carried a folder in one hand, a coffee in the other. Inside, waiting at the long oak conference table, were three people. Mayor Lanning, Grace Mendoza seated straight-backed with her own folder of findings, and Tamara Wells, now officially reassigned as Department Liaison for Federal Oversight. Lanning greeted them with a forced smile. Didn't expect this many visitors. Leonard didn't return the smile. He laid the folder on the table. These are the preliminary findings, he said. 5 confirmed policy violations, 3 cases of falsified reports, 2 incidents of body cam tampering, and 1 active attempt to obstruct a federal investigation. Lanning's face stiffened. Are you recommending prosecution? Leonard paused, then turned to Grace. We're recommending a full personnel audit, she said, effective immediately, and the removal of Officer Curtis Dell. Lanning leaned back. You're asking me to fire one of our senior patrol officers. Leonard's voice was steady. We're asking you to restore trust in a system that's been broken for too long. Tamara added, you can protect a man who buried evidence, or you can stand with the community that just spoke up. The mayor stared at the table. No talking point could smooth this over. No quiet suspension would fix what had already been said on record out loud in front of everyone. Finally, he nodded. I'll issue the termination letter today. Leonard closed his folder and rose. We'll be monitoring compliance. Any delay, any further tampering will be escalated to the Bureau. The meeting ended without applause or ceremony, but the weight of it stayed in the air. Leonard didn't head straight to his car. Instead, he walked slowly through the square. The town was just waking up, shopkeepers unlocking doors, students with backpacks crossing the street. At one corner, a teenager in a blue hoodie looked up, made eye contact, and gave Leonard a small nod. It wasn't out of fear. It was something else. Leonard returned the nod, tucked his hands in his pockets, and kept walking. The speeches were done. Now the real work would begin. Officer Curtis Dell didn't knock. He just stepped into Sheriff Halburn's office like he had every other day for the last 10 years. But this time there was a nervous edge to his walk, a stiffness in his shoulders. He tried to carry himself like nothing had changed, but everyone had seen the shift. The fake ease, the forced casual glance, the way he avoided Tamara Wells' eyes as he passed her in the hallway. You got a minute, Dell asked. Ricky didn't look up from his desk. Make it short. Curtis hesitated, then stepped closer. Look, I didn't know who that guy was. If I had known he was FBI, I don't care if he was a garbage man or a ghost. Ricky said flatly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a threat. He didn't even move until you gave him no choice. And you still brought him in like he was a street thug. Dell shifted on his feet. I panicked, all right. He got vague, started talking about federal protocol. We've seen fake badges before. And when he handed over a real license, Ricky asked, eyes now locked on him. What then? You just tossed it out the window. Curtis dropped his gaze. I screwed up. From the doorway, Tamara stepped in quietly. She crossed her arms and added, you didn't just screw up Curtis. You put all of us under the spotlight. And maybe that's where we should be. He turned toward her, startled. You serious? I'm tired, she said. Tired of reading reports that don't match the footage. Tired of watching people walk out of here more broken than when they came in. Ricky didn't say a word. He just sat there, jaw tight, one hand resting on the desk phone. He was already thinking about how much more would come to light because the story wasn't over. Not even close. Not with what Leonard had just uncovered. Back at the motel, Leonard sat at a desk beneath a buzzing lamp. His eyes were steady fingers typing calmly. No emotion, just clarity. A list was growing on his screen, names, dates, red flags. Incidents long buried under paperwork and silence. He wasn't working from anger. Emotion clouded things. He worked from patterns. He opened the department's internal portal and submitted a second formal request for every body cam log associated with use of force incidents over the past year. He wasn't fishing. He already knew what he'd find. Within the hour, an email came back. Some footage unavailable due to recurring software malfunctions. Maintenance review pending. Another mark. Another excuse. Another lie. Leonard picked up the phone and called the DOJ's digital forensics contact. They've had 6 camera outages in 10 months, he said, only during stops involving Black or Latino citizens. Nothing during drills or low-risk stops. That's enough, the analyst replied. We're greenlighting full extraction. The next morning, Leonard returned to the station. He didn't wait to be welcomed. He walked down the hall and handed Sheriff Halburn a sealed manila folder. I also got access records, he said. Ricky didn't open it. Someone went in. Leonard continued and deleted the camera logs manually, after the arrest, before the arraignment. Ricky closed his eyes and sat back in his chair. We're looking into it. No, Leonard said, quiet but firm. You're not, I am. He turned to leave, then stopped at the door. I suggest you have Officer Dell's badge and weapon ready by end of day. Internal Affairs will be on site this week. Ricky didn't argue. He didn't look up, and Leonard didn't need him to. By Wednesday morning, 2 black SUVs pulled into the rear lot. No sirens, no warning, just presence. Leonard stepped out with Grace Mendoza and Nathan Cole beside him. The review was now official. Grace took command of the records room. Personnel files, misconduct reports, disciplinary reviews, all opened and spread out like pages in a worn-out book. Nathan moved silently through the server room with Brian, the department's IT tech. Together, they pulled deleted video fragments, flagged, tampered entries, and traced access logs. There were more names, more dates, more missing footage. One recovered audio clip caught Leonard's attention. You think you're above the law? A door opening, a grunt, the sound of gravel under pressure. Leonard took off the headphones and stood. We're issuing a compliance hold, he told Ricky. Effective immediately, no officer from this department is to take part in any field operation. Emergencies only. You're under federal supervision. Ricky leaned forward, tired. You know what this will do to us? You know what not doing it already did, Leonard replied. Tamara met Leonard at the base of the stairwell with a folder of her own. I pulled the complaint log, she said. There's a pattern in the denials. Most were dismissed without a single interview. No evidence collected. And guess whose name shows up on every one? She handed him the paper. Curtis Dell, over and over. Leonard folded it once and slipped it into his coat. Good work. Tamara hesitated. Do you think any of this will really change something? Leonard didn't answer right away. That depends, he said gently. Do you? That evening, Leonard returned to the station one final time. In Sheriff Halburn's office, Officer Curtis Dell was already waiting. No words, no uniform, just a man standing in the quiet shadow of consequence. Ricky handed him a printed letter signed by the mayor. Effective immediately, it read. Dell stared at the pawn, then at Ricky. That's it. You think it shouldn't be? Ricky asked. Curtis's voice cracked. I did what I thought was right. I didn't know. You didn't care, Ricky interrupted. That's what did you in. Dell didn't argue. He walked out through the back door. No one saw him again that day. Tamara stood in the hallway watching the shift ripple across the department. Some officers were quiet, some relieved, some bitter. But the silence had a different tone now. This wasn't over. But it had started. Later that night, Leonard returned to the mayor's office. Grace, Tamara, and 2 representatives from the Department of Justice joined him. They sat around a plain table. No press, no cameras, just work. Together they began drafting new protocols. Mandatory body cam audits, departmental review board with public oversight, use of force policy revisions, quarterly training on civil rights compliance, anonymous reporting system for internal misconduct. No one clapped. No headlines followed. But the work, the real work, had begun. Outside, the sky had started to dim. The air smelled of pine and coming rain. Leonard stepped into the street, let the stillness wash over him. His phone buzzed. DC again. More follow-ups. More cases. He muted the call and let his hands rest at his sides. Not out of defiance, just needing a moment because the badge might have given him access. But it was what he did with it that mattered. The sun dipped low over Biloxi, casting long shadows on the old brick buildings and warm pavement of the town square. Leonard Briggs sat on the edge of his motel bed, shoes still on phone, silent beside him. The day had been long, but the kind of long that didn't bring exhaustion, just stillness. He thought of the courtroom, the town hall, the hallway where Curtis Dell quietly handed over his badge. Thought of the boy in the blue hoodie who gave him a nod, not out of fear, but from a place of respect. A kind of unspoken knowing that someone had finally shown up and done the hard thing. Leonard didn't smile. He didn't need to. This was never about applause. Back at the police department, new systems were taking shape. The faces that once looked away were beginning to make eye contact again, some with regret, some with something closer to hope. Tamara stood quietly at her desk watching the subtle shift in how people spoke, how they walked, how they listened. Change didn't announce itself. It moved slowly like the turning of seasons. But it was moving. At City Hall, protocols were being rewritten, not perfect, not finished, but different. For the first time in years, people were asking questions that had long gone unspoken. And Leonard, he packed up his laptop, zipped his worn travel bag, and called DC. "Send me the next location," he said softly. There was a pause on the other end. Already. Then he hung up, stood in the doorway of that quiet motel room, and took one last look at the place where things had changed, not through shouting, not through force, but through truth. He wasn't a hero. He was a man doing his job. This story isn't just about one officer or one courtroom. It's about how we treat people when no one's looking, about how easily respect can disappear, and how powerful it becomes when it returns. Sometimes justice arrives in silence, not with fanfare, but with the soft voice that says enough. If you've ever felt unseen, if you've ever been underestimated, remember this: silence doesn't mean weakness. Dignity doesn't shout. And doing the right thing doesn't need a spotlight. It just needs someone willing to show up. If this story stirred something in you, if it reminded you of a moment you lived through or someone you love, feel free to share it. We're listening. Leave a comment if you'd like. Tell us what you felt or just say hello. And if you'd like more stories like this, real stories told gently and honestly, you're welcome to join us by subscribing. No pressure, just a place to come back to when you want to remember what fairness feels like. Take care of yourself. We'll be here.